If only I had known from the beginning who Dylan, my sister's charming boyfriend, really was. The way my wife laughed a little too hard at his jokes. The lingering looks they exchanged when they thought I wasn't paying attention. And then, that slip during an close moment between us, her whisper of his name. They'd been doing it all along, right in front of me, deceiving me, mocking me. But what burns brightest in my memory isn't the betrayal itself. It's the moment their carefully constructed world crumbled. The moment they knelt before me, their faces streaked with fear and shame, begging for mercy, pleading for me to stop. We'll get to that. I'll tell you how a man like me, calm, measured, always in control, was pushed to the brink, and why, in that moment, I didn't hesitate to let everything explode. For most of our marriage, I believed I had the kind of life others envied. Emily and I had built what felt like a solid foundation. Shared ambitions, laughter, and the occasional argument that never lingered past the night. People often told us we looked good together. I, the successful architect, always calm and calculated, and she, the vibrant social beauty who could light up any room. Emily's family was tight-knit, and they had welcomed me as one of their own from the start. Her sister, Sophia, was her closest confidant. When Sophia introduced Dylan at a dinner 6 months ago, I remember thinking how effortlessly he fit in. Dylan had that magnetic confidence, the kind of man who could charm anyone without trying too hard. He shook my hand firmly, held my gaze a second too long, and called me brother by the end of the night. Harmlessly arrogant, I'd thought at the time. Sophia was smitten, glowing in a way I hadn't seen her before. Dylan told us about his tech startup, his sports car, his international travels, all the trappings of a man who had conquered the world. Emily seemed impressed, but then again, she always had an appreciation for charisma. I didn't mind. I trusted her completely, as any husband should. That night, as we drove home, Emily spoke about Dylan with the casual admiration one might express for a movie star. Sophia really lucked out, she said, smiling. I agreed, happy that her sister had found someone who seemed to treat her well. But as I replay that moment now, I can't help but wonder if I missed something. A flicker of something deeper in Emily's voice, a subtle shift in her tone that should have warned me. At the time, the thought never crossed my mind. How could it? The life I shared with Emily seemed untouchable. Perfect. Looking back, perfection was the first lie I told myself. The cracks were already there, invisible beneath the polished surface. Dylan wasn't just a guest at that dinner. He was the first omen of what was to come. It was a night like any other, or so I thought. The kind of evening where routine felt comforting, not dull. Emily had lit a candle on the nightstand, its soft glow flickering against the bedroom walls. I had leaned in to kiss her, to let the rest of the world fall away. For a moment, everything felt right, and then she whispered it. Dylan. The name was like a slap, sudden and jarring. My body froze against hers, and the warmth between us evaporated in an instant. I pulled back sharply, staring at her in disbelief. The room, so cozy a second ago, now felt suffocating. What did you just say? My voice was low, but the edge in it couldn't be missed. Emily blinked, her face suddenly pale. What? Nothing? She stammered, her hands instinctively reaching for me, as if to erase the moment. I didn't say anything, but she had, clear as day. Dylan? I repeated, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. You said his name. Her lips parted, searching for words. It was a slip. A mistake, she said, her voice trembling. You know, like a Freudian thing. I wasn't even thinking about him, but her eyes betrayed her. They darted down and away, unable to meet mine for more than a second. Guilt. I knew the look. It was unmistakable. I stood up, grabbing my shirt from the chair and slipping it on. My mind raced as my pulse hammered in my ears. It wasn't just a mistake. Couldn't be. A mistake didn't cause someone to look like they'd been caught stealing. I need some air, I muttered, my voice cold. Victor, wait, she pleaded, reaching for me again. Her hand brushed my arm, but I pulled away. As I left the room, my mind spun. The name felt like a key, unlocking a door I wasn't ready to open. Why had she whispered his name? Why Dylan? Of all people, Dylan. The moment replayed in my mind, over and over, as I sat in the dark living room. My chest felt tight, my breath shallow. It wasn't just the name, it was everything else. The way Emily had seemed unusually interested in family gatherings lately. The way her phone always seemed glued to her hand, though she never left it unlocked when I was nearby. I had never doubted her before. But now, doubt crept in like poison, spreading with every passing second. What was Dylan to her? And what had he already taken from me? The whisper haunted me. For days I tried to push it aside, to chalk it up to the kind of strange, meaningless mishap that could happen to anyone. But deep down I knew better. Something was wrong. Emily seemed different. At first I couldn't quite put my finger on it. It wasn't a glaring change. She didn't pull away from me or pick fights. If anything, she was more attentive, almost overly so. But there was a forced quality to her cheerfulness, a tightness in her smile that hadn't been there before. I started noticing her phone. She always had it in her hand, her fingers flying over the screen. Yet the moment I entered the room, she would angle it away or put it down. Once, when she left it on the counter to grab something, I glanced over and saw a long thread of messages. The name at the top? Sophia. Just checking in on my sister, she explained when she saw me looking. You know how things are with the wedding planning. It was plausible enough, but it didn't sit right. How much wedding drama could require hours of texting every day? And why did she look so uneasy when I casually asked about it? The cracks widened at the next family gathering. It was a sunny Saturday, and we were at Sophia's house for a casual backyard barbecue. Everyone seemed to be in good spirits, including Dylan. He was in his element, laughing too loudly at his own jokes and commanding attention like a self-proclaimed king. I watched him closely for the first time, paying attention to things I hadn't before. His gaze lingered on Emily for a second too long when he thought no one was looking. When he offered to refill her drink, his hand brushed hers in a way that seemed more intimate than necessary. Emily, for her part, was subtle but not subtle enough. She laughed at his jokes more than anyone else did. Her head tilted just so, like she was hanging on every word. When Dylan spoke, she leaned in ever so slightly, as though drawn to him. At one point, as I stood at the grill, I caught them sharing a private smile across the yard. It was fleeting, but it hit me like a punch to the gut. I know you'll call me weak, but how else could someone react in such a situation? I was with her for many years, and now I'm expected to instantly grasp the full scope of it? Instantly accept that I'm being betrayed? Maybe deep down I already knew, but I'm certain you wouldn't have been able to face it either. You'd put off acknowledging the truth for a long time. My mind was doing everything it could to protect me from it. But you know, the more you suppress something, the more it builds until it explodes without your consent, becoming uncontrollable and even frightening to yourself. That's exactly what happened to me. But we'll get to that later. When we got home that evening, Emily acted like everything was fine. She kissed my cheek and thanked me for being so sweet to her family. I forced a smile, but inside, I was unraveling. The seeds of doubt had taken root, and they were growing fast. Every look, every text, every laugh between them felt like another thread being pulled loose in the fabric of our life. For the first time in our marriage, I began to question the one thing I thought was unshakable, my trust in her. It happened on a Thursday night, when Emily had gone to bed early, claiming a headache. I stayed up, nursing a drink and flipping aimlessly through channels, my mind restless and uneasy. When I went to the kitchen to grab some water, I saw it, her phone, left forgotten on the counter. Normally, I wouldn't have touched it. Trust had always been the bedrock of our relationship, or so I thought. But tonight was different. Doubt had been gnawing at me for weeks, relentless and sharp. Before I could stop myself, my hand reached out. The screen lit up under my touch, and there it was, a text from Dylan. You looked stunning today. Could barely keep my hands off you. The words blurred for a moment, as if my brain refused to register them. My pulse quickened, a deep, ugly heat blooming in my chest. I scrolled through the conversation, the floodgates now open. Message after message, each more damning than the last. You should have worn that black dress. You know, the one I like. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Same time, same place. You have no idea how much I miss you right now. And then, the photos. My hands trembled as I swiped through them. Selfies, stolen moments of them together, and worse. Some were from months ago, predating Sophia's relationship with Dylan. This wasn't new. This wasn't a fling. This was a betrayal years in the making. A cold, sickening realization settled over me. Emily had brought Dylan into her sister's life to keep him close, disguising their affair under the guise of family. I set the phone down carefully, though my entire body screamed for me to throw it against the wall. My breathing was shallow, and I felt unmoored, as if gravity had loosened its grip. In that moment, fury coursed through me, hot and unforgiving. My world had been stolen by her, by him, by their deception. But beneath the rage was something colder, sharper. Clarity. I knew I couldn't confront her yet, not without a plan. Anger alone wouldn't be enough. If I wanted justice, real, cruel justice, I had to play this carefully. I grabbed my drink and sat back down in the darkened living room, my mind spinning. The texts and photos burned in my memory, fueling the fire in my chest. I clenched my jaw and swore silently to myself. They thought they could humiliate me, reduce me to a fool. They thought I wouldn't find out. But I had. And soon, they'd realize just how much damage I could do when I was the one holding the cards. The invitation came in a gilded envelope, its edges embossed with floral patterns, and the words, "You're cordially invited," scripted in elegant gold. Emily handed it to me with a forced smile, her hands trembling ever so slightly. "Sophia and Dylan are engaged," she said, her voice tight. "The wedding's in 3 months. It'll be grand." I glanced at the invitation, feigning indifference, and nodded. "Good for them," I replied casually, setting it on the kitchen counter. But inside, my mind roared with possibilities. A grand family wedding. A gathering of friends, relatives, and acquaintances, all in one place. It was perfect. The ultimate stage. The next few days passed in a haze of tense silence. Emily seemed relieved by my lack of reaction, likely assuming I'd swallowed her lie whole. But I watched her closely, my expression neutral as I calculated my every move. If this was going to work, I needed more than the texts and photos I'd found. I needed undeniable proof, something so damning it would leave no room for denial or manipulation. And I needed to make sure everyone would see it. I started gathering evidence. Late at night, while Emily slept, I scoured her phone again, backing up every message, every photo, and every incriminating detail to a secure drive. I tracked her movements, noting the times she claimed to be running errands or helping Sophia with wedding plans. I also reached out to a private investigator, a no-nonsense woman named Claire. She'd handled messy affairs like this before and knew exactly what to do. Within weeks, Claire confirmed what I already suspected. Emily and Dylan were still meeting in secret, their affair as brazen as ever. Claire provided me with photos, timestamps, and even recordings of their rendezvous. The more I learned, the more my fury crystallized into determination. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about reclaiming my dignity and showing them, in the most public way possible, the consequences of their actions. To pull this off, I needed allies. Quietly, I began reaching out to a few trusted family members. Not everyone, just those who would believe me without question and help amplify the fallout when the time came. When the day of the wedding drew closer, I smiled more around Emily. I told her I was looking forward to celebrating Sophia's big day, and even offered to help with logistics. She seemed relieved, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. By the time the wedding arrived, my plan was in place. Every piece was set, every detail accounted for. I would wait for the perfect moment, when the facade of their love story was at its most convincing, and then I would tear it all down. This wasn't going to be a simple confrontation. No, this would be a reckoning, a performance they would never forget. And when it was over, they wouldn't just feel humiliated. They'd feel destroyed. The time for silence had ended. That evening, I waited for Emily in the living room. The incriminating evidence spread out before me on the coffee table. My laptop displayed the messages and photos I'd uncovered, while a folder containing the private investigator's report lay beside it. The weight of the truth filled the air, and I braced myself for the storm about to break. When she walked in, she paused, sensing the tension immediately. "Victor?" she asked, her voice cautious. Her eyes flicked to the items on the table. "Sit down," I said, my tone low and even. She hesitated but obeyed, sinking slowly onto the couch across from me. Her hands fidgeted in her lap, her gaze darting between me and the evidence she hadn't yet dared to acknowledge. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "I know," I began, keeping my voice steady despite the fire in my chest. "About you, about Dylan, about everything." Her face paled, but she forced a laugh, shaking her head. "What are you talking about?" I didn't respond. Instead, I turned the laptop toward her, scrolling through the damning messages and photos. Her smile faltered, and then vanished entirely. "Care to explain?" I asked, my voice cold. At first, she denied it, scrambling for excuses. Those messages mean nothing," she stammered. "They're just jokes. He's Sophia's fiancé. For God's sake, you're overreacting." I didn't flinch. I pulled out the folder and tossed it onto the table. "And these? Are these jokes too?" She opened the folder with trembling hands, flipping through photos of clandestine meetings, timestamps of her lies, and transcripts of their stolen moments. Her facade cracked, and the guilt poured through. Tears welled in her eyes, and she dropped the folder as though it burned her fingers. "Victor," she whispered, her voice breaking. I didn't mean for it to go this far." "It was a mistake. Please, I'm sorry." She reached for me, but I pulled back, staring at her with a calmness that hid the storm inside. "A mistake," I echoed. "This wasn't a one-time lapse, Emily. This is years of betrayal. And you didn't just betray me, you betrayed your sister. You've destroyed everything." She sobbed, her hands clutching at her knees. "Please, Victor, I'll end it. I'll never see him again. Just give me a chance to fix this." I stood, towering over her, my shadow stretching across her trembling frame. "You'll end it tonight," I said. "And don't think for a second that I don't know about the wedding. If you don't handle this now, I will." Her head shot up, panic flashing across her face. "No, please, don't ruin the wedding. I'll talk to Dylan. I'll make sure it's over." "You have one chance, Emily," I said, my voice hard as steel. "One. Don't make me regret giving it to you." She nodded frantically, wiping her tears, and stumbled toward the bedroom, clutching her phone. I knew what she was doing. Calling Dylan, trying to warn him, trying to salvage their twisted little secret. But it didn't matter. I already knew she would fail. This wasn't over. Not even close. The stage was set, and soon, they'd both discover the consequences of betraying me. The next morning, Emily acted as if our confrontation had never happened. Her smiles were brittle, her words overly cheerful, but I knew she was scrambling to control the damage. She'd promised to end it with Dylan, but I hadn't believed her for a second. I didn't need her to end it. I needed her to keep thinking she had the upper hand. It was time to put my plan into motion. The first step was planting seeds of doubt within the family. I carefully selected a few relatives, those who loved drama but were trusted enough to avoid confronting Emily directly. From an anonymous account, I sent a few carefully chosen pieces of evidence. Screenshots of texts that hinted at an inappropriate closeness between Emily and Dylan, photos that looked innocent at first glance but, upon closer inspection, told a darker story. The messages were vague enough to avoid immediate action but damning enough to stir whispers. I knew how family gossip worked. It spread like wildfire, fueled by speculation and suspicion. At the same time, I doubled down on my evidence gathering. Claire, my private investigator, had proven herself invaluable so far, but I needed more. Something even Emily and Dylan couldn't talk their way out of. Keep following him, I instructed Claire over the phone. I want everything, his movements, his habits, the people he meets. Especially the people he meets. Claire didn't disappoint. Within days, she delivered photos of Dylan at a dimly lit bar, shaking hands with a man who, according to her research, had ties to organized crime. Another night, she followed him to a poker game held in the back room of a dubious club. The money exchanged wasn't small. Dylan was reckless, arrogant, and clearly dabbling in things far more dangerous than an affair. I knew I could use this. Dylan thought he was untouchable, but he had no idea how vulnerable he really was. While Claire worked, I turned my attention to the wedding itself. The guest list, the seating arrangements, the speeches. It was all public knowledge thanks to Sophia's social media updates. I studied every detail, planning exactly how and when I would make my move. But the centerpiece of my plan was the projector. I'd already secured the device, along with a preloaded USB drive containing the most damning evidence. Texts, photos, and even a video Claire had obtained of Emily and Dylan at a hotel. I wasn't ready to use it yet, but when the time came, it would be impossible for them to deny what they'd done. The days leading up to the wedding were excruciating. I kept up the facade, pretending to be the supportive husband, while Emily tiptoed around me, unsure of where we stood. Dylan, smug as ever, acted as though nothing was amiss. But beneath the surface, the storm was building. Every whispered conversation, every sideways glance at a family dinner, every lie Emily and Dylan told to keep their secret safe only added fuel to the fire. When the wedding day finally arrived, I was ready. The stage was set, the players were in position, and the audience had no idea what was coming. The fall was going to be spectacular. The wedding venue was as grand as Sophia had promised. An elegant ballroom adorned with cascading white flowers, crystal chandeliers, and tables set with silver and gold accents. The kind of place where fairy tales were supposed to come true. Emily clung to my arm as we entered, her grip tighter than usual. Her face was painted with a smile, but I could see the cracks beneath it. Her eyes darted nervously around the room, and I could feel her body stiffen whenever we passed someone who might have received one of my anonymous messages. "Relax," I whispered, the false reassurance dripping from my lips. "It's a happy day, isn't it?" She nodded, swallowing hard, and her smile grew even more forced. Across the room, Dylan was in his element, a drink in hand and his trademark smirk plastered on his face. He moved through the crowd with ease, shaking hands and charming anyone who crossed his path. It was sickening to watch him work. So sure of himself, so confident that his secrets were safe. I kept my distance, choosing instead to play the role of the attentive husband. I mingled, offered polite conversation, and even toasted to Sophia and Dylan's love. But all the while, I was watching, waiting for the moment when their careful facade would slip. The tension in the room was palpable. Whispers swirled through the air, low and insistent, like a storm gathering on the horizon. I caught snippets of conversations as I moved through the crowd, questions about Dylan's past, raised eyebrows at Emily's nervous behavior. The seeds I'd planted were already taking root. As the ceremony drew near, I noticed Emily's phone buzzing incessantly in her clutch. She glanced at it several times, her lips tightening with every notification. Dylan's confidence faltered whenever he caught her eye, his smirk dimming into something more cautious. They were unraveling, and they didn't even know it yet. It wasn't hard to spot the signs. Emily had excused herself 3 times already, her excuses flimsy and rushed. Each time, I noticed Dylan following shortly after, slipping away from the crowd like a shadow. The 4th time, I followed. They'd chosen one of the private bathrooms near the back of the venue, far from the bustling main hall. I stood outside the door for a moment, listening to the muffled voices within. Dylan's smooth, cocky tone was unmistakable, and Emily's anxious whispers made my stomach turn. I pushed the door open without knocking. They froze, their bodies pressed too close for plausibility. Dylan's hand resting lightly on Emily's waist. Her lipstick was smudged, and his tie hung loose around his neck. The color drained from Emily's face as she saw me, her mouth opening in a silent gasp. "Victor," she started, stepping back as if distance could erase the scene. I didn't say a word. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Dylan was the first to react, raising his hands in mock surrender. "Hey man, this isn't what it looks like. Save it." I cut him off coldly, my voice steady as I continued filming. Emily's eyes filled with tears, and she reached out toward me. "Please, Victor, let me explain." I stepped back, avoiding her touch. Dylan's false bravado cracked as he stammered, "Look, we can talk about this. Just stop recording. Okay?" But I didn't stop. I captured every second of their humiliation. The desperation in Dylan's eyes, the broken sobs spilling from Emily's lips. When I was satisfied, I lowered my phone and tucked it back into my pocket. I met Emily's tearful gaze and Dylan's panicked one, my face a mask of calm. "You two deserve each other," I said simply. And then I turned and walked out, leaving them to their shame. The stage was set, the evidence undeniable. The storm I had prepared was about to strike, and there was no escaping it now. The reception was a dazzling affair. Lights twinkled overhead, laughter bubbled across the room, and champagne glasses clinked in celebration. Dylan and Sophia sat at the head table, beaming as speeches were delivered in their honor. Emily sat beside me, her hand trembling on her lap, her smile a rigid mask. I waited for the right moment. When the speeches wound down, I stood and raised my glass, signaling to the MC. "May I say a few words?" I asked. The room hushed, all eyes turning to me. Emily stiffened beside me, her knuckles white as she clutched the edge of the table. "Of course," the MC said, handing me the microphone. I walked to the center of the room, my posture calm and confident, and raised my glass high. "To love, loyalty, and family," I began, my voice carrying easily over the crowd. "Three things we hold sacred. Three things we should never take for granted." The room murmured in agreement. Dylan leaned back in his chair, smirking as if my toast was meant for him. Emily shifted uncomfortably, her gaze fixed on her lap. "But," I continued, my tone hardening, "sometimes we discover that love isn't always loyal, and family isn't always honest." Confusion rippled through the crowd as I gestured toward a projector screen set up behind me. "I've prepared something special for the bride and groom," I said, glancing at Sophia with a small smile. A little glimpse into the reality behind the romance. I pressed a button on the remote in my hand, and the screen flickered to life. Gasps echoed as the video began to play. Dylan and Emily in the bathroom, caught in their moment of betrayal. Their whispered words, their panicked faces, and their pleas were all laid bare for the room to see. The sound of the room shifted, from gasps to murmurs, from murmurs to outrage. Sophia's face twisted in horror as she stared at the screen, her hand flying to her mouth. Dylan shot to his feet, his chair clattering to the floor, shouting for someone to turn it off. But I wasn't done. "You see, this isn't just about infidelity," I said, my voice cutting through the chaos. "This is about deceit, about the people we trust the most betraying us in ways we can't even fathom." Sophia collapsed into tears, her friends rushing to console her. Dylan, his face pale and furious, tried to flee the room, but two of Sophia's cousins blocked his path, their faces dark with anger. Emily remained frozen in her seat, tears streaming down her cheeks, her body trembling. The damage was done. As the crowd seethed, I stepped forward again, signaling for the room to quiet. "There's more," I announced, my voice commanding. Because Dylan's betrayal goes far beyond his personal life. I produced a second USB drive and inserted it into the projector. This time, the screen filled with documents, photos, and videos detailing Dylan's financial scams, secret debts, and his dealings with shady figures. Dylan isn't just a liar, I said, my voice cold. He's a con man. He's been siphoning money from his so-called startup to fund his gambling habit and his affair. And if that wasn't enough, he's been laundering money for men you don't want to cross. The crowd erupted again, the murmurs turning into shouts of anger and disgust. Guests who had invested in Dylan's venture stood, demanding answers. Family members glared at him with open hatred. By the time I finished, Dylan was a broken man. His smirk was gone, replaced by a mask of desperation. He begged for mercy, swearing that things weren't as they seemed, but no one listened. Emily wasn't spared either. Whispers of her betrayal spread like wildfire, and she became the target of cold stares and sharp words. "How could you?" Sophia screamed, her voice hoarse with emotion. "How could you do this to me?" The fallout was immediate and devastating. Dylan was left ostracized, his reputation shredded, his allies gone. Emily was no better off. Her family refused to speak to her, and she fled the venue in tears, humiliated and alone. As I watched the chaos unfold, I felt no guilt, no regret. They had played their game, thinking they could deceive me, manipulate me, humiliate me. But now they understood the consequences of their actions. I set my glass down and walked out of the room, leaving them to face the wreckage of the lives they had built on lies. They had wanted power, control, and pleasure, but in the end, I was the one who held all the cards. The days following the wedding were quiet, eerily so. I knew it wouldn't last. People like Dylan and Emily couldn't survive in silence. They thrived on manipulation and control. It was only a matter of time before they crawled back, desperate to salvage whatever they could. And sure enough, they came. It was late in the evening when the knock echoed through my front door. I opened it to find them both standing there, disheveled and hollow-eyed. Dylan's once confident posture was slumped, and Emily's face was streaked with tears. "Victor," Emily started, her voice trembling. "Please, we just want to talk." I stepped aside, motioning for them to enter. The living room was dimly lit, a single lamp casting long shadows across the walls. On the coffee table sat a steel pipe, heavy and cold, its presence deliberate and undeniable. They noticed it immediately. Dylan's eyes flicked nervously toward the pipe, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed hard. Emily hesitated, glancing at me for reassurance she wouldn't get. "Sit," I said, my voice calm but firm. They obeyed, sinking into the couch like condemned prisoners awaiting sentencing. Dylan was the first to speak, his words tumbling out in a desperate rush. "Look, man, I didn't mean for it to go this far. I was stupid, okay? I'll pay you back whatever you want. Just let this go." Emily reached for my hand, but I stepped away, her touch repulsive now. "Victor, I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I'll leave Dylan. I'll do whatever you want. Just give me another chance." I picked up the steel pipe, letting its weight settle in my hand. The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to choke on. I turned it slowly, studying its polished surface as though it held the answers to questions I hadn't asked yet. "You think an apology is enough?" I said, my voice low and steady. "You think you can grovel your way out of this?" Dylan shifted uncomfortably, his hands fidgeting in his lap. "Victor, please." "Shut up," I snapped, my gaze piercing through him. He flinched, his bravado crumbling into raw fear. I stepped closer, holding the pipe firmly in my grip. "You humiliated me," I continued, my voice rising. "You betrayed me. You took everything I trusted, everything I built, and you crushed it under your feet like it meant nothing." I locked eyes with Dylan, my fury burning through every syllable. "You think you're an alpha? You've taken everything from me, and now you'll see what it's like to lose it all." Without breaking eye contact, I swung the pipe downward, not at him, but at the glass coffee table. It shattered instantly, shards flying across the room as both Dylan and Emily screamed. The sound reverberated in the silence, and Dylan shot up from the couch. "Jesus Christ, Victor!" he shouted, his voice cracking. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I wasn't finished. I turned and smashed the pipe into Dylan's phone, obliterating it in one swift motion. "You don't get to make calls," I said coldly. "You don't get to explain your side. Not anymore." Finally, I leveled the pipe between them, pointing it like a blade. Emily clung to Dylan, both of them trembling. "I'm not going to hurt you," I said, my tone icy. "That's too easy. But now you'll live with the fear that I might. Every single day." I dropped the pipe onto the floor with a loud clang and walked out of the room, ignoring their pleas for mercy. Their voices faded behind me as I stepped into the night, leaving them to grapple with the wreckage of their lives. They had taken everything from me. Now they had nothing left of their own.